All right, our next guest needs no real introduction. A man who has done it all, pretty much. And I think out of anyone who has ever been on the show, I think this is a guest who I could talk to for probably hours on hours on hours, but we don't have that kind of time today. So please welcome Eric Bischoff to the show. Eric, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Steve. Good to be with you.
Now, everybody out there listening, I want to let everybody know that on February 10th, a Saturday night, you and Bruce Pritchard are going to be in Detroit with our friends at Heroes Hideout. You can get your tickets at heroeshideoutny.com. But now, I'm only speaking to you for a few minutes today, but what can the fans out there expect from you and Bruce that night?
Well, of course, both Bruce and I are going to be a part of Astronomicon in Sterling Heights, just outside of Detroit, which is kind of cool because I was born and raised in Detroit, but I haven't been back there in many, many, many years. So I'm looking forward to getting back and obviously seeing all the wrestling fans and hanging out with some good friends like Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, and obviously Bruce Pritchard. But, you know, hopefully we'll get a chance to visit with some friends and family that I haven't seen in, I don't know, decades. So it'll be great. And Detroit's a great wrestling market. There's just a tremendous history with professional wrestling in Detroit. I grew up becoming a fan of professional wrestling, watching big-time wrestling on CKLW in Detroit when I was a kid. So for me, it's kind of like, you know, really a homecoming in many respects. So it'll be a blast. And, you know, as far as Bruce and I and the Dirty Dozen kind of thing we're doing, that's separate from the Astronomicon, and it's I just guarantee it's going to be a good time. You know, when you get Bruce and I together, or anybody else that have worked together over the years, we kind of feed off the energy of the crowd, and it takes on a life of its own. So it'll be a little wrestling party for sure.
Definitely. I encourage everybody, at least head on over to heroeshideoutny.com. You can get tickets for that event. I wish I was going to be there. We're coming from New York. That's in Detroit. But definitely, I know we have a lot of fans over in Detroit that will definitely be hitting up that show that night. Before we came to know you in WCW, you did have a brief appearance in the WWE, and I believe you were asked to cut a promo on a broomstick when you first interviewed with the WWF at that time. Is that true? And can you take us back what happened that moment when you first tried out with them?
Yeah, it is true. And occasionally some enterprising young social media mogul will find a way to grab that clip of my audition, how it made it, you know, out into the to the internet universe. I'll never know, but it's out there. It's floating around. If you dig hard, you can find it on YouTube. But I had been working with the AWA. I started with Vern Gagne in the AWA back in the summer of 1987, and I worked for Vern for a couple of years. And Vern was, you know, he was really struggling. He was on his last legs financially in the AWA, and the handwriting was on the wall. And I knew he wasn't going to be able to keep the doors open too much longer. And about that time, there was an ad in the paper in Minneapolis, where I was living at the time, and WWF, is what they were called back then, was they put an ad in the paper. They were looking for somebody to join the announce team. I responded to the ad. Of course, I had been on television for a little bit by that point. I was doing kind of hosting Vern Gagne's AWA show on ESPN. So I had, you know, a little bit of on-camera experience, and I guess I had hoped that they kind of knew who I was based on that. And WWF flew me out, and I got to New York the night before. I was nervous as hell. I was broke as hell. I hadn't gotten a paycheck in 3, 4, 5 months. I had 2 young kids at home that were living off hot dogs and beans, and I was heating my home with a little portable propane heater in the middle of the winter in Minnesota. So things were tough. I was getting my cars repossessed out of my driveway, and bank was in foreclosure, or was about to foreclose on my house. So I really, really needed that job badly. And I was nervous as hell. I mean, I was excited because it was such a huge opportunity. I don't think at that point in my life I'd ever been to New York before. So that was kind of an amazing trip. And I got there the night before, couldn't sleep, got up the next morning, got myself as ready as I could possibly be because I didn't know what to expect, quite honestly. And it sent a limo over to the hotel and picked me up. And God, I just felt like, some kind of a big damn deal. And got to the studios, the WWF studios, and was introduced to a couple different people, Bruce Pritchard being one of them, who was working for WWF at the time. And I was escorted back into the TV studio, and I stood there out on the set, and I heard Vince McMahon and Kevin Dunn over a microphone. They weren't there in front of me, but they were kind of over the intercom, directing me in terms of what they wanted to see me do. Mm-hmm. And, we went through a couple things. I don't remember what they were, but like, hey, welcome everybody to the show and tell us what's on the show today. And they gave me a couple matches to hit. And then, I did that a couple times and did a couple other things. And I don't know if it was Vince or Kevin Dunn. I think it was probably Vince. Said, hey, somebody hand Eric a broom. So one of the stagehands came over and he handed me a push broom. And then Vince over the intercom said, okay, I want you to sell me that broom. Tell me why I should buy that broom from you. And, I didn't, I had no experience selling brooms, but I thought, what the hell, this is my shot. Mm-hmm. So I went into my sales pitch and did the best I could trying to sell Vince McMahon a broom. And, that was the end of it. They thanked me for coming. I had no idea whether I sold that broom or not. And, never heard back. So, yeah, that was that. I went back to Minnesota and struggled for about another year, and I just refused to get out of the wrestling business because I knew once I got out, even though Vern couldn't afford to pay me and he was on his last legs, I knew that if I stepped away from it being the wrestling business, there was no chance I would ever get my foot back in the door anywhere. So I stuck it out, and then probably about a year later, WCW was looking for talent. And I did the same thing, only that time I got the job.
Wow. Well, did you ever imagine back then that, just a few years later or, not too many years after that you'd be going head to head with Vince himself after that whole ordeal? I mean, you probably couldn't have imagined leaving there that day that, the future, that's what the future would hold for you.
No, and, what's really funny, not to get too philosophical, here, but, now that, I'm 62 years old, and the context of time has changed so dramatically for me as I've gotten older. Mm-hmm. I look at now, I've got kids that are in their 30s and are successful. And to me, I see my kids, I talk to my kids regularly, obviously, but in my mind, they're still little kids. Yeah. I still look at my little kids. Time plays funny tricks on your brain. And at least it does me. And to your point, when I launched Nitro in 95, I was only 4 years removed from trying to sell a broom to Vince McMahon. 4 years is a blink of an eye. Yeah. But at that time, back in 95, when I was in the middle of it all, it seemed like decades since I had tried to audition for WWE. And I know that doesn't make much sense, but when you're in that moment and you're in that time frame, 4 years back then just seemed like a lifetime, or at least half of one. And now I look back and go, wow, just like you just did, thinking, wow, that is really strange. In 1991, I was trying to sell Vince McMahon a broom, and 4 years later, I'm trying to kick his ass on national television. kind of a big transition.
Oh yeah. Now, I think we live in a different world of wrestling today. We have wrestling pretty much almost every night of the week, and that's pretty much mostly from the WWE alone. But back in the day when you were booking, 3-hour Nitros before we even had 3-hour Raws. What do you think is the hard part about booking such a long show? Back then, maybe compared to today's audience, I mean, it's definitely, I think, a different vehicle, at least.
Well, it's not only WWE is not only producing a 3-hour show; they're producing a 3-hour live show 52 weeks a year, and then on Tuesday nights they're producing a 2-hour live show 52 weeks a year. And on top of that, they've got, ancillary programming like 205 Live and Next and all that other kind of stuff. Oh, and by the way, on top of that, they're touring 300 live events a year that are not televised. So the sheer workload of it all, kind of overall is mind-boggling to begin with. But when you talk just about the television show, a 3-hour format, there's a lot of things that are hard about it. Mm-hmm. It's the travel, the logistics, the amount of talent that you have to keep on your roster, because you can't just have the same people wrestling week after week after week. You kind of run out of ways to mix them and match them. So you need to have a pretty massive roster. You're telling a lot of stories, to fill a 3-hour episode. Mm-hmm. You add to that the fact that injuries and personal issues and other challenges pop up in the middle of all your plans. We saw what happened with Enzo Amore the other day, mm-hmm. a couple of weeks ago in New York. Things like that happen. People get hurt. You have legal issues pop up, family emergencies, people get sick. So no matter how much you plan ahead, there's always something that's going to force you to go back to the drawing board and literally rewrite a show, hours before airtime. And that's a hell of a challenge. Until you've done it, it's just really hard to explain just how big of a challenge that is.
Sure.
And I think one of the other things, and on the other side of it, that's what makes it hard as a producer. From a consumer point of view, an audience point of view, the challenge as a producer, though, is in today's environment, even more so now much more so now than when I was doing it. It's so much harder to keep the audience's attention, because now, a wrestling fan will be watching, Monday Night Raw and also watching something on their phone.
Yeah.
And going back and forth on the internet and seeing what other people have to say about what it is they're watching, as it's happening live. So it's much harder to keep people's attention and their focus. And on top of that, just to make it even more of a challenge, there's just so much more content out there.
Yeah.
It's harder. And not just for wrestling, for any kind of, traditional television production network or production company or television network. It's harder to get people to sit and watch content on television because, there's so many streaming opportunities. There's the internet, there's mobile phones, there's apps, there's video games. There's so many things now that grab the audience's attention that you've got to really create compelling content to get them to watch your show each and every week, and especially for 3 hours. Audience now has an attention span, of about 6 minutes. So you've got to produce accordingly.
Like I mentioned, wrestling is pretty much just nonstop these days. But do you still get to keep up with any of it at all? And if so, is there anyone maybe out there now that impresses you?
I don't watch it. I can't sit down and watch 3 hours of anything, really, especially 52 weeks a year. So I tend, my lifestyle now is such that I tend to drop in on a regular basis. And when I say drop in, I may watch a half hour here, an hour there. I subscribe to the WWE Network, so if there's anything that's really cool and interesting that I want to catch up on, I can, in terms of pay-per-views and so forth. But if I hear or read about, because I do stay on top of what's going on in the industry, mm-hmm. I keep my ear to the ground. So if I hear about something coming up on Monday Night Raw or on SmackDown that, someone that I'm familiar with, a friend or somebody that I've worked with in the past is involved in, I'll certainly check in. Clearly, leading up to the big events, I tend to drop in. I mean, it's kind of like, I'm the same way with the NFL and the NBA. I don't really start paying close attention until right before, playoffs start.
Sure, yeah.
In playoffs. So in the WWE's case, I start really dropping in right before a big pay-per-view because that's when the stories are kind of hitting their peak arc. But, I stay on top of it. In terms of people that I like, I'm a fan of Roman Reigns. Anybody that's heard me do an interview before knows that. half of the people that hear that, go, wow, that's great. And half of the people that hear that go, wow, he's an idiot. But I think Roman Reigns is, I think we're going to see a lot more Roman Reigns. I think we've only just begun to see what Roman is capable of as a character. I don't know Roman. I've never even had a conversation with him. And I could be dead wrong, but there's something in my gut, just my producer's instinct that tells me that there's something there that we haven't seen yet. And I'm looking forward to seeing that emerge. And then hopefully I'm right. I like Dolph Ziggler, man. I've been saying that now for years. Dolph Ziggler to me is a guy, although he's kind of a guy that kind of comes in and out of storyline. Sometimes he's more or less high profile, sometimes he's not. But to me, he reminds me of, and I know this is going to sound crazy to some people, but he reminds me of Kurt Angle. Mm-hmm. And in the sense that, Kurt is obviously in a class unto himself as a gold medalist, so it's not necessarily that. But Kurt Angle is a character who, in one moment, can be a comedic character. He can be funny as hell. He's just, he literally, there are times that I think he should be doing his own stand-up routine in Las Vegas, right? Mm-hmm. And he can be that, really great, believable, fun, comedic character that's just all entertainment. And then at the flip of a switch, he can become the most credible, badass, frightening, intimidating, real-world character that makes you forget that you're watching, sports entertainment or professional wrestling, and you get sucked into the believability of his character because of who he is. And I really like characters that have that kind of ability and diversity and range. And I think Dolph Ziggler is much the same way. I think Dolph is a guy who can play that, kind of cheesy, high entertainment value, fun, comedic character, but he also has the background and the ability, at the flip of a switch, in my opinion, to become that really real world, gritty, believable, dangerous, intimidating character. And I appreciate that in a performer.
Definitely. Now, I think a lot of wrestlers seem to be working in New Japan more these days, I think, to make themselves a bigger name in the wrestling world. I don't know how familiar you are with him, but, like a guy like Kenny Omega, whose star power has pretty much risen in the past few years, especially after last month's match with Chris Jericho, pretty much putting each other on the map again. Do you think like a guy like Omega could be a star in the WWE when maybe that time comes?
I think it definitely could be. I mean, he's got and I think it's a fascinating, evolution of sports entertainment, professional wrestling that owes itself to the digital growth and explosion in media. The reason that Kenny Omega is, kind of a household name, I guess, in the world of professional wrestling here in the United States is simply because of the strength of digital platforms that allow us to see New Japan Pro Wrestling. I know it's on Access TV, but for the most part, I think, Kenny Omega's name was built, because of streaming and the fact that, New Japan Pro Wrestling was able to get their content, out there and into the hands of wrestling fans in ways that 5 years ago didn't exist. Mm-hmm. You couldn't do it 5 years ago. And so I think, to answer your point, I think Kenny Omega, if he chose to, could definitely be a huge star in WWE. But what's really interesting to me is I don't know if he'll choose to. Because he's making a great living. He's got a great life. There are a lot of things about WWE that are really restrictive and challenging, schedule being one of them. The commitment you have to make to be a top star in WWE, I can't even begin to comprehend what that's like.
Yeah.
I mean, just schedule-wise. But, Kenny's got a great opportunity now, and he's got the freedom and flexibility to kind of be his own man. Cody Rhodes is doing much the same thing. Cody Rhodes, took it upon himself to leave WWE. He had a good gig there. He had a great opportunity. He had a gig that everybody that's most people coming up through the independent scene would only dream to have. And Cody Rhodes walked away from it and chose to wrestle the independent scene and to make his mark over in New Japan. And he's making a great deal of money and having a tremendous amount of success in the process. That opportunity didn't exist 4 years ago or 5 years ago. It's just now, really, in the last couple of years, that a performer could go out and not only make a living on the indie scene, but in some cases, guys like Kenny Omega and Cody Rhodes, and I'm sure others, are able to go out and make a significant living on the independent scene. And I think that's an exciting, evolution of our business.
One little story that's happening now, I'm kind of curious your thoughts on it. It kind of started when Dave Meltzer was asked if Ring of Honor could sell out a 10,000 seat arena, and he replied with not anytime soon. So Cody Rhodes, the Young Bucks, they're out to throw the show on September 1st called All In, basically looking to be the biggest indie show out there, trying to sell these 10,000 seats out. Do you think they can do it outside of basically putting the show on themselves? It's not under Ring of Honor. It's not under, WWE or whatever kind of a banner. It's almost like a bet from Cody Rhodes to Dave Meltzer. But do you have maybe any advice to them on how to make it a success and to sell out that show coming up September 1st?
No, I really don't have any advice. I believe it's possible. I believe it ain't going to be easy. But nope. Again, if you look at the strength of Cody Rhodes' name, if you look at the strength of Kenny Omega, the Young Bucks, and I'm sure there are going to be others on that card that are going to be the best of the world of independent wrestling. I believe it can be done. Digital, social media has changed the game so much. If a year ago you would have asked me that, I would have said, no, I agree with Dave Meltzer. But now, given the opportunity to market, to promote, to reach, to galvanize an audience, to brand an event or brand a promotion, is so much more accessible now than it was even 18 months ago because of the technology that has evolved in the industry. So if I was a betting man, I'm not sure I'd bet my house on it, but I also wouldn't bet my house against it.
Do you ever look back on your career in wrestling and ever wish maybe you could have done something differently?
There's always things you would do differently. There's things Vince McMahon would do differently. There's things that everybody would do differently. There's things Bill Gates would do differently. Not every decision you make is the right one, whether you're successful or not. And sure, there are things I would do differently, but I don't think about it.
Yeah.
Honestly, my wife, she counseled me for years. We've been married now for almost 35 years, and she's a very positive person. She's always been very supportive, but she's a very, very positive person. And she counseled me, for a long time about, don't dwell on the past, don't worry about the future. Really just think about the moment. Think about where you're at today and how to make today the best day it can be, or this afternoon the best afternoon it can be. And don't dwell on the past or worry about the future, because you can't really change either one of them. You can kind of be prepared for the future. You can't just be oblivious to it. But I certainly can't change the past. So spending any amount of time or energy thinking about the past or allowing it to, as you put it, haunt me is totally unproductive. So no, I don't think about it, man. I'm grateful for it. I've had an amazing career. I've seen things I never thought I would see. As a kid growing up in East Detroit, who, on Saturday mornings watched, big time wrestling on CKLW, to be able to have done the things that I've done and achieved the things that I've achieved, meet the people that I've met and worked with, and traveled the world. Are you kidding me? Man, I'm just grateful for every minute of it.
Well,
good and bad.
Well, Eric, we're thankful for your time tonight and grateful for the years you've given us in the world of pro wrestling. Where can the fans keep up with you these days on social media and whatnot?
On Twitter, @eBischoff, BISCHOFF. That's the only place. But I spend a lot of time on it. I post pictures of my dogs and my horses almost every day. So,
perfect. Eric, we thank you so much, and we really appreciate your time tonight.
All right, man. Good to see you.